Hey everybody, thanks for dropping in. I just wanted to make a quick video to give a kind of channel update as to the kinds of content we'll be producing in the future, and I wanted to answer some of the frequently asked questions that I've been getting in the comments. So, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody who supported the channel one way or another. I've enjoyed reading the comments with everybody's theories and suggestions, and I'm really thankful for all the growth you've given this channel over the past few months. It's a really kind of a crazy testament to people's attraction to the lore of Bloodborne that they're even interested in such a small channel over 5 years after the game's been released. So yeah, I just wanted to thank everybody for that. With all of that out of the way, I'd like to go ahead and announce that once the channel receives 10,000 subscribers, I'd like to go ahead and stream another playthrough of Bloodborne. Although, if you've watched my previous lore throughs that are archived on my channel, I mentioned that if I were to do another stream of it, I'd like to look at version 1.00 of the game, just the unpatched disc, to just kind of highlight some of those differences between the game's versions. And so I'm unsure if I'll stream on Twitch or YouTube, since the majority of my followers on YouTube, but if you guys have a preference, feel free to leave a message in the comments or hit me up on Discord as well. Since I've already done 2 lore throughs comparing the English and Japanese versions of the text, I think if I did another stream, I'd probably play it a bit more casually and maybe only highlight the biggest differences between them. So rather than looking at like every single note, dialogue, or item description, I'd probably just do what stands out the most. So those are my current thoughts for now, but if there's more demand for me to make a more in-depth playthrough of the game in either the chat or the comments below, I'm willing to change my mind on that front. So as far as future content goes, so far I've been focusing on videos that I really haven't seen others touch upon. So now that I've covered things like the Old Blood, the Vile Bloods, and Shinpi in Japanese, I think I might turn my attention to more conventional topics from time to time. For example, for my next video, I want to talk about Yahar'gul and the One Reborn. I know I've covered it briefly in the past, and I know others have done videos on that as well, but I think there might be some more interest in dedicated videos about that topic, so I'll be doing that one next. So moving beyond that, I want to start to broaden the scope of the channel and start comparing Bloodborne to other games and other forms of media that I've seen. I'm pretty excited about it. It just takes a while to gather my thoughts on everything and piece them together into a script that I'm comfortable with releasing, and then getting the footage and voice recording and all that. So we will get into that topic more in the future, and I'm excited to present it. But for now, let's go ahead and quit my ceaseless rambling and go into some of the most frequently asked questions. What made you get into Bloodborne and its lore? So that's a pretty good question. I think, like many of us, I first played through the games, but I didn't really understand the story that was going on. The first one I played was Dark Souls, and I didn't even realize that the game had cohesive lore until I saw some YouTube videos that went into depth about it, and that just kind of opened my eyes into the kind of depth that the games had. And so once I beat Bloodborne, I was just kind of awestruck at just how crazy a game it was, and so I wanted to learn more about it. But when I went to look at some more lore YouTube channels and really dive into it, I didn't get quite the closure that I would have liked. I still had a lot of unanswered questions, so I just kind of felt the need to dive into it myself. So the next question is, how do you do research for lore? So that's another good question. Generally, I would say pick a topic that you're interested in and try to study everything you can about that topic, and from there, you'll start to learn more about the game overall. So for example, if you want to learn more about Cainhurst and its nobility, I would suggest looking at all of the items related to Cainhurst, then going through the actual level of Cainhurst and looking at the kinds of enemies there, then comparing them to where they can show up in other maps and things of that nature. And then as you progress from there, you'll start to learn more and more about the game. So that's also kind of how I approached the game when I was translating it. I was looking at descriptions that interested me in the moment, and so I kind of came to a piecemeal understanding of the game, and there's really no right way to go about doing it, in my opinion. It's just looking at what evidence you have, coming up with conclusions, and then trying to pick apart any inconsistencies in your own conclusions. And then from there, it's really just like focusing on the visual design of the game and trying to see what other kinds of hidden messages you can discover through what's left laying about in each level. So the next question is, what's with the way you talk and your pronunciation of blank? So when producing lore videos, one of the things that I try to be cognizant of is how many people aren't necessarily native speakers of English. And so when I do produce my videos, I try to be deliberately slower and enunciate my words much more clearly than I normally would in my like everyday life. So with that in mind, I suppose it's a little bit more difficult for me to read naturally just because I have to like consciously slow down the way that I speak to make it work. Even though like I feel like when I listen to myself in these recordings, it feels like I'm speaking unbearably slow, which is kind of ironic, I suppose. But yeah. As far as my pronunciation of certain words like Odin being like Erden, it's just partially laziness. Like I'm American, so the way that my tongue rests isn't quite natural to pronounce Erden pretty well. So Erden is just, I suppose, a bit lazy. For Abritus, there's a dialogue reference in one of the cut content files of the Blood Minister where he says upon the awakening of Abritus. So for my lore videos, I've adopted saying that instead of what I would normally say, which would be like Ebrietus. And for the Tumerians, I see PTH at the beginning, and I think like Thumerian, like depth. So I don't know. It's just something I didn't really think about beforehand, but it's whatever, you know. Comes with the territory. If you make a bunch of content on YouTube, to expect a decent amount of criticism. But that's okay, I'm still learning. So next is, how did you learn Japanese? Are you fluent? Do you have any advice about learning the language? So when I first started learning Japanese, my school didn't offer it. My high school didn't offer any like Japanese classes, so I went out and got like a workbook and like a small little grammar book where I began to teach myself fairly poorly. But once I got into college, I majored in it, and from there, I just kind of continued to study on my own. And that's kind of like one of the harder parts about acquiring a language. It's like even after you've studied for a really long time, you still realize how much you don't know. And so it's kind of daunting to feel like you've already climbed a mountain to look up and realize you're not even like at the top. So as far as me being fluent, I personally don't like to call myself fluent just because, I don't know, in my head I think that really just means like native level proficiency. But like conversational, yeah, definitely. It's just, I don't know, I just don't like the term personally. And as far as advice about learning the language goes, I would say be a bit realistic in like kind of setting your goals. Do you want to learn the language as a hobby? Do you want to learn it to follow up with some interest, like whether that be like watching anime or playing games in the native language? Just realize if you do, it really does take a lot of time and effort. But aside from that, if you just enjoy learning and the kind of challenges that learning the language presents, I would say definitely go for it. My biggest piece of advice is really don't be afraid to make mistakes and to put yourself out there. Just from my personal experience, like if you've seen students who've gone to like foreign exchange trips and they don't really feel comfortable speaking to natives, or they're afraid they're going to make a mistake, then they kind of clam up. They really don't progress as much as those who are willing to kind of get over that hurdle. It's really uncomfortable, I know. It's kind of uncomfortable like making these kind of videos and putting myself out there as well. But if you're unwilling to face that, it just kind of really stifles growth, in my opinion. And aside from that, I would say the grammar is the hardest portion to learn on your own, and it really is like pretty necessary to have a teacher. Although I suppose now, like in the age of YouTube and stuff, it's a lot easier to get access to high quality resources than when I was first learning the language, for sure. Aside from that, once you get past like the schooling portion of learning a language, the hard part is knowing how to progress from there and just continuing on from there. So the last thing I'd want to stress is Once you get to a level where you're pretty comfortable with the language, you want to stop using more just like bilingual dictionaries and start learning more from like the native level dictionaries, because if you look at just like a one word, you'll really only get a small glimpse into like its real meaning and very little context as to how it's actually used. So you could like look at a word like truth and see it is translated as like honto, shinjitsu, shojiki, and while those are all kind of right, they really just don't give like the proper context for how they're actually used and what they mean. Moving on, we have wasn't the game written in English first? So this question comes up surprisingly often. While certainly the dialogue was recorded in English first, the dialogue which the game is relying upon comes from Japanese source materials first. Not from software, but Frog Nation has said in an interview that they used Miyazaki's draft materials to craft the English script, and that's what they used to record the dialogue. And all of the item descriptions and whatnot are also from Miyazaki's drafts as well. So aside from that, if you wanted to look into like the credit sections of the game, there is no like Japanese localization team. Like it's very clear that the game was written in Japanese first and was localized into English after the fact. Do you plan on covering other games? So the short answer to that question is yes. However, as far as like Bloodborne content goes, there's still more that I want to cover. And as far as like Dark Souls and Sekiro go, and Demon Souls, I don't have a PS3 or a PS5, so I haven't played Demon Souls. And I'm not as familiar with Dark Souls lore as I am Bloodborne's. And Sekiro is just a bit more linear, so I'm not quite as interested in covering that game as some of the others. But games in general, I do intend to start incorporating into the channel a bit more in the future. When I do get into those other topics that are more tangentially related to Bloodborne and some of the motifs used within it, I'll start bringing up other games as parallels, which we can compare them to, and I might start to use that as a kind of launching platform into other forms of content going into the future. But before I forget, there are a few things that I've noticed in the translation of some of the Dark Souls series items that I'll probably bring up and make some really highly focused videos on, but nothing quite at the same scope of my Bloodborne content so far. So the final question is, why haven't you covered blank? I do get a lot of requests to cover both Bloodborne's DLC and Dark Souls lore, and even Demon Souls. As I just mentioned, I haven't played Demon Souls, so I can't really go into the lore about that. As far as like Dark Souls lore goes, I will talk about some of that in future videos, but as far as like the DLC and some other topics that have come up, I might just be saving that stuff for more future content. As I mentioned earlier, the stuff that I wanted to focus on first was stuff that I really haven't seen been given a lot of attention by the community at large, so I felt there was more of a pressing need to kind of cover those topics first. But if I do get more requests for specific topics, that might help incentivize me to make videos about those topics sooner. So go ahead and give me your suggestions about what you want to see, and hopefully we'll cover it in the future. So that pretty much sums up all of the answers to the most frequently asked questions I've gotten so far. If you guys do have more questions or suggestions or more topics that you want me to cover in the future, feel free to let me know in the comments below, or even join the Discord and let me know there. So that's pretty much it for the channel update, so be sure to let me know if you'd rather watch another Bloodborne stream on either Twitch or YouTube once we do hit that subscriber goal. I'll also go ahead and post a stream schedule beforehand, so that way it doesn't catch anybody off guard if they want to drop by. But once again, I want to thank everybody for your continued support throughout this endeavor, and remember, fear the old lore.